Chapter 8. Tackling Tough Issues. Do you poop? Fred got used to answering that question. Kids asked it all the time. They also wanted to know things like how he got in and out of the TV set. Fred tried to answer everything honestly and directly. He read every letter he got, and he always wrote back. Sometimes he sat up late at night with Joanne, and together they worked through the mail. It was slow going. They kept stopping to read the letters out loud to each other. But Fred got a lot of new ideas for shows from those letters. There was nothing too small or too big for him to talk about. Discussing difficult topics made some adults want to change the subject. Not Fred. He talked about war in 1968 when the United States was in a war in Vietnam, and again during the Gulf War with Iraq in the early 1990s. He also tackled divorce, reassuring children that it wasn't their fault if the parents split up. Fred knew children got sad, angry, and anxious, just like adults did. Talking things out usually made people feel better. But Fred didn't always use words. Some things didn't need explaining. They just needed doing. One of the first people Fred added to the neighborhood was an African-American man named Francois Clemens, who played a policeman. One hot afternoon, Mr. Rogers had a wading pool set up in his backyard. He invited Officer Clemens to sit down and relax for a bit. They took off their shoes and socks and soaked their feet in the cool water together. Not long before this show aired, it had been perfectly legal to prevent black people from sharing the same swimming pools or beaches with white people. That had only changed after the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. Some white people still looked down on African Americans, but Fred believed everyone should be treated the same. He didn't say a word about it, but he made it clear when he put his feet next to Officer Clemens in the pool. The Civil Rights Movement. Even though slavery, the act of owning another person, was made illegal in 1865, black people still did not have many rights. In many places, African Americans could not vote or own houses. They could not attend the same schools as white people or use the same bathrooms. During the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, African Americans joined together to protest this treatment. They had marches to demand equal rights. Some white people were angry about it, but many others supported the cause. The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. It guaranteed the same rights for all Americans. In 1968, two very important American leaders were assassinated. One was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a leader in the civil rights movement. The other was Senator Robert Kennedy. He was the brother of President John F. Kennedy. Robert Kennedy had been running for president himself. Both King and Kennedy were killed because of their political beliefs. Fred knew kids were hearing a lot about the violence happening in their country. He worried about how they would handle it. Fred stayed up all night to tape a special show about the death of Robert Kennedy. During the program, Lady Aberlin talked with Daniel Striped Tiger to explain what had happened in the most gentle way that Fred could think of. At the end of the episode, Fred spoke directly to the parents. "I plead for your protection and support of your young children," he said. "There is just so much that a very young child can take." Fred could not protect children from big problems like violence or death, but he tried to make these things less scary. When he was a child and something bad happened, Fred's mother had told him, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." That's what Fred was doing, and that's what he was teaching kids to do.